Welcome into the Sportsmemo College Football Every Game on the Board podcast. We're going game numbers 109 down to 144 on the first part, I guess you could say, episode of the Every Game on the Board podcast, covering Thursday, Friday, and the beginning of Saturday's college football slate with our guest, Robbie Veno. Rob, welcome into the podcast. How are you?
I'm good today, Drew. How about yourself?
I'm doing good, buddy. We got some good college football coming up, and you've been good. The 4 and 5% plays in college football, 30 and 17 plus just under 20 units on the season, 64% year to date. And guys, the coupon code is Veno40, his last name Veno 40 at checkout for 40% off any all-access pass with Robbie Veno. That could be 3-day, 7-day, 30-day, or 90-day. Veno40 at checkout at sportsmemo.com. Robbie, first game up Thursday night, 109-110, Wake Forest at NC State. Looks like we got a total of 69 here with NC State, the Wolfpack, laying 17 at home.
Yeah, for both of these teams, the obvious, Drew, is they both present threats to the opposing defenses for sure. Where Wake Forest is concerned, the pace that they've played at this year, even faster than what they played at last year. They currently rank fourth in the country in possessions per game, getting about 15 and a half possessions in there. NC State will go right along with that. I don't think NC State is with their passing nature, is the type of team to try and slow it down and keep Wake Forest offense off the field. The big question mark, of course, for that Wake Forest offense, it's going to be at the quarterback position, where Sam Hartman, their starting freshman quarterback, goes down last week. Done for the season, it looks. You're going to have Jamie Newman starting here for Wake Forest. They could play Kendall Hinton in a couple of packages, Drew, but it looks like it'll be Newman. Hartman and Newman battled each other right to the very end of summer practice for this starting job. So even though he hasn't had much in the way of game time so far this season, Newman was, a potential starter to start the year. The drop-off, though, to me, might be a little bit more significant than you would think. So we'll see how Wake Forest handles that. But for NC State, when you come off of the difficult games that they played, and now you get into a weaker part of the schedule, especially defensively. You saw last week they put 47 up on FSU. I think they could score 47 again here, especially at the pace that this game's going to be played. Total's not out of the question here, and it'll matter how many defensive stops Wake Forest can come up with. I don't feel like they can come up with very many against this NC State team. Once again, just to let the audience know that the injury situation for Wake Forest has just been brutal on the defensive side of the football, and it's a major reason why they have just continually given up so many yards on defense. Right now they're giving up an average of 494 per game. Tough to play NC State that way. The NC State defense, much better than that. For me, maybe a look at the over, Drew, and 17 becomes a key number. Probably couldn't get involved where that's concerned, because Wake Forest has such an ability to score points.
Robbie, you said Wake Forest. Did you say they average 17.5 possessions or 14.5 possessions per game?
They average 14 point, or was it 15 point? I got to get back to my notes here. It's 15.5 per game, which is fourth in the country behind Syracuse, Liberty, and Houston. So that's a lot of possessions per game.
And it's interesting that you bring up and even break it down into decimal format as far as the possessions per game. Do you handicap that way, or do you do kind of snaps with time remaining on the play clock when you're handicapping totals, or do you do the possessions per game? No,
I'm pulling this from other analytics places, Drew. Wake Forest, second in the country. If you want to get even further into how many plays per minute that they run 3 plays a minute. So you figure every 20 seconds they're snapping the football. That's good for second, right behind the Houston Cougars. But yeah, these are advanced analytics that I'm just pulling from other places.
Okay. No, good stuff there. We got the Friday slate. We got another ACC battle here. Louisville at Syracuse. We got 68.5 with Syracuse laying 21 at home in the Dome. And Robbie, Louisville, man, they've been giving up a lot of points. I think And Bobby Petrino, what he's at least good for 20, right? So is this total a little low in your opinion as well? It's 68.5.
Boy, it could be, Drew, because I've read and heard throughout the week a couple of times that perhaps this Louisville team is just finished with listening to Bobby Petrino. You hate to say that about a team, and you hate to think that about a team. The results are kind of speaking for themselves at this point in time. You just take a look at their last 4 games, and they're all ACC opponents: Georgia Tech, Boston College, Wake Forest, and Clemson. Obviously, all 4 of those in different ways capable of scoring a ton of points. But what Louisville's allowed to those 4 teams is ridiculous. They've given up 59.3 points per game, so 59 points a game is over 8 touchdowns. 8 touchdowns and a field goal every single game on average, and 559 yards. Outgained over that course of time, 559 to 386, outscored 59 to 25. So 59 and 25, if you just want to use last 4 game average, is 84 points, well over the 68.5, 69 asked for here with the current line. And where Syracuse is concerned, they're always a little bit better at home. They've been a lot better at home so far this year as far as offense is concerned. They're averaging 47 a game at home. Some of it skewed a little bit, Drew, by the opposition, and you could throw Wagner out of there. You'd still get a big number of points scored, but you could throw Wagner out of there. And 524 yards per game. So the way Louisville's just leaking on defense, there's no reason to think Syracuse will be stopped here. This is a 7-2 team that actually has 10-2 in their sights. I can't remember the last Syracuse team that won 10 games. I mean, without knowing the answer, I would think it goes back to Donovan McNabb, the last time Syracuse won 10 games. But they have that potential here. I don't see Louisville stopping them much. They'll get a couple of scores, like you say. They're probably good for 20 on their own. But Syracuse is a 21-point favorite here for a reason. This should end up in a blowout.
Yeah, Dino Babers doing a hell of a job up there in New York. But we got a big one out west here, Robbie. This has kind of turned into a heck of a rivalry with Fresno State at Boise State. 2.5 or 3 is what the Bulldogs from Fresno State are laying on the blue turf. I believe this is the first time Boise State will be a home underdog since 1999. Robbie, not sure if you saw that number as well, but this one totaled at 54. How would you look to bet it?
Yeah, I didn't see that exact number, Drew, but it wouldn't surprise me. I mean, when would they have last been a home underdog, considering the conference schedule that they've played and the lack of Power 5 teams that come to Boise? Nobody comes there, so maybe it was, in a bowl game, humanitarian bowl or something. I don't know, but it would make perfect sense that Boise has not been a home underdog but once since that time. This is huge, Drew, inside the conference. I mean, these 2 teams play in opposite divisions, but right now Boise sits 1 game behind Utah State in the Mountain Division, and Fresno State sits 1 game ahead of San Diego State on the west side. For Fresno State, it's the start of a real big 2-game swing because they're going to play San Diego State next week. So these are real important for Fresno State. This one against Boise, next week against San Diego State. I think both defenses, the best units on the field here. Certainly Fresno State's defense has been lights out all season long. The fact that they've only allowed 111 points through 9 games already is really sensational. 12.3 per game. They're scoring at a clip of 40 per game. Jeff Tedford's offense, since he came back as head coach, hasn't really been known for explosiveness. But the last 2 weeks, and let's face it, let's go back the last 3 weeks, they've caught some really bad defenses. New Mexico, Hawaii, and UNLV. Between the 3 of them, if they combine their defensive personnel, they probably couldn't hold Fresno State under 35. So it's got to be a major step up in class for their offense when they step on the field here against Boise. And the same can be said for Boise, although I feel like they have played a little bit tougher schedule as far as defenses are concerned. They played BYU last week, which is a solid defense. They played Nevada a few weeks back, which is coming on defensively. And they played San Diego State and Wyoming as well. So Boise State's offense might be the better battle-tested offense. Certainly the home crowd will be behind them. I think, my estimation, Brett Rippon gets a little bit of an edge at quarterback. And, knowing that this is probably the first really intense game that Fresno State has played all season long, let's see how they react to it. Let's see how Marcus McMaryion reacts at quarterback for Fresno on the road here in front of this crowd. For me, I think I would like Boise in this game. I would like the home team. I would like the points, but you can't deny the disparity between what Fresno State's done offensively and what they've limited their opponents to offensively. The numbers, the gaps are just huge. We'll see if Boise can put a dent in a few of those. For me, though, I think I would take Boise plus points here.
Robbie, onto the Saturday slate, we got Temple at Houston, AAC clash here. 69 the total, with Houston laying 5 at home. This Temple team, they kind of hung in there with UCF, but got boat raced in the end. A couple extra days to prepare, that game being on a Thursday, but they're on the road here. Do you think the extra time helps them here against the Cougars?
It certainly can't help, right? It can't hurt, excuse me. It certainly can't hurt Temple to have a couple extra days off. And I think, when we start talking about boat raced, boy, the performance Houston put up last week against SMU, the defense finally caught up with the Houston Cougars. They have been lousy, especially where pass defense is concerned all season long. SMU got off quick. SMU is a team, we talked about them as far back as 3 weeks ago, Drew, as a team that was on the ascension, and they are moving upward pretty quickly. Ben Hicks and company got out there, got a 17-0 lead. I don't know whether the 90-minute lightning delay hurt or helped Houston in that contest. They were on their way back, trying to make a furious comeback. In the end, at 38-31, SMU puts up the last touchdown of the game to win by 14. But you have to go back to Houston's defensive numbers against the pass here, allowing 324 passing yards per game, one of the worst in FBS football right now. And Temple, as you saw against Central Florida, boy, they've got the ability with Ventrell Bryant and their wide receivers to attack downfield. We talked about that a little bit too, how Temple's not this, heavy run-oriented, throw, play-action pass type team. Under Jeff Collins, they do attack vertically. That's not good news for Houston. All that being said, the Temple defense is going to have to react to Derek King here, who is just a fantastic dual-threat quarterback. I don't know that on their schedule this year, Temple's had to face anything like this as far as dual threat ability goes. I know they played Maryland, which features Kasim Hill, but Kasim Hill just doesn't have the wide receiving threats. He doesn't have the passing accuracy of King. So I would say this is the toughest quarterback to date for Temple, except for Mackenzie Milton, who they played last week, and you saw what Mackenzie Milton did to them. Looks to me like it could be another high-scoring game like Temple was involved in last week, Drew. I know 52-40 is a little extensive, 92 points, but hey, where Temple's concerned, when they've had to play these good offenses, they've given up a lot of points. I'd imagine they give up a lot again here too.
Yeah, I think this total's hanging a little low, and that's in the upper 60s, so something to watch there in Houston on Saturday. We got a Big Ten affair, Michigan at Rutgers, 39.5. 48.5 the total, so a lot of points projected for Michigan, not so much for Rutgers. How do you see this one, Robbie?
It's almost all you need to say, right? Right there. I mean, the line maker's telling us all we need to know. If you weren't somebody who followed college football and every single team intensely the way that we do, you could just stare at that line and understand exactly what should happen on the field here Saturday in New Jersey. Rutgers has little chance to exceed 10 points in this game. Michigan's defense has just been outstanding all year long. The only thing you could hope for here, Drew, is a slight letdown out of Michigan. I mean, the way Jim Harbaugh sort of ran it up last week on Penn State, I know there's a little bit of bad blood there between he and Penn State head coach James Franklin, and Harbaugh had to prove his point because the year before, Penn State certainly buried Michigan when they had the better team. So, the team could come in. You're facing Rutgers now. I think a letdown is natural. But, you could let down 3-4 ticks and still be able to shut down the Rutgers offense. I think for Michigan, a real big, significant addition, which goes somewhat under the radar here, is the return of Tarik Black at wide receiver. Remember, he got hurt all of last year, hurt his foot again at the beginning of this season, and with an additional weapon for Shea Patterson now, they maybe can implement some stuff out of their playbook that they haven't been able to go to for a majority of this season. As we come down the stretch here, they've got bigger games on deck against Indiana and then, of course, Ohio State, and a potential berth in a college football playoff. So I think it's really good for Michigan to have Black back in this lineup, and we'll see if he gets used a little bit. Maybe they experiment somewhat with him on the field here in this game.
Robbie, we got Virginia Tech at Pittsburgh, 52 the total, with Pitt laying 3. There is a 2.5 out there in the marketplace at home.
Boy, Virginia Tech, I mean, Bud Foster, it must drive him crazy to have his defense perform the way this one has this season. There's plenty of reasons for it, and he's trying his best to deal with what's an extremely young secondary, capped off by sort of an inexperienced front seven. And it shows up in the numbers, Drew. I mean, obviously, last week Boston College runs for 219 against them. The week before, Georgia Tech ran for 465. The week before, North Carolina ran for 235. You seldom saw that. But Bud Foster's in his 23rd year as defensive coordinator of the Virginia Tech Hokies, and I just can't remember a 3-game stretch where Virginia Tech got run over, power football-wise, by opponents. So, they've got troubles on all angles here as far as stopping opposing offenses is concerned. The thing that they have to rely on is the arm of Ryan Willis right now, and can he do enough damage against Pitt? That's an extreme possibility because he's been good throwing the football in spurts. Last week again, 281 yards passing in that loss. I think the fact that Virginia Tech doesn't run it the way they used to, and when you take that combination, can't stop the run and can't run the football, it makes for a problem, especially when you're Virginia Tech and you pride yourself on that. I know that Justin Fuente is a little bit different style head coach than Frank Beamer was, but he's still Justin Fuente needs the running game to go with his spread attack. Pittsburgh was very surprising last week, Drew. It was played in bad weather against Virginia in Charlottesville. We had that game on the podcast here, and I had made the comment that Pittsburgh hasn't thrown for over $170, I think it was, all season long, and they really didn't need to do much in the way of passing last week either. They beat Virginia on both sides of the line of scrimmage last week. Very impressive win. They're predicated on the run. Virginia Tech doesn't stop the run right now. I find it hard to play against Pittsburgh in this scenario. The only thing that bugs me, aside from the fundamentals being so good in favor of Pittsburgh, the one thing that would bug me a little bit is that they're just not used to playing pressure games. I mean, they sit on top of the Coastal Division right now. You're talking about a chance to be in the ACC championship game. They closed real strong down the stretch last year under Pat Narduzzi. I think they covered their last 4 in a row and went like 5-1 or 6-1 against the spread down the stretch. They're doing the same again this year, so credit to the head coach. If it were me, I'd play Pittsburgh. I couldn't play any other way.
Robbie, we got a big one in the ACC, Clemson at Boston College. I believe game day will be there, likely the biggest game in Chestnut Hill in quite some time. Looks like Clemson laying 20 on the road, 58 the total. Actually just went to 19.5 at Chris as I'm talking. But Robbie, I think this total looks a little high. We got 20-mile-an-hour winds. Looks like 40 degrees. Also, you're putting a bunch of South Carolina kids. Trevor Lawrence, he's from Cartersville, Georgia. 40-degree weather, windy. I don't think it bodes very well for Clemson. Obviously, the more talented team, good, stout defensive front, so I don't think that projects well for Boston College either. I think it all kind of points to 58.5 being a little high. I like the under here. What do you think?
Yeah, it's very possible, Drew. I think that the way that Travis Etienne and the Clemson running game has worked, or at least the way it worked last week, winds and cold weather wouldn't affect the running game. But if there is a strength of Boston College, and I would use the combination of the home crowd and the atmosphere that's going to be there when I use the term strength in this particular game. But they only allow 144 on the ground. They're going to be fired up, so Clemson's going to have to go to the air. Now, the head coach Dabo Swinney said it best a couple of weeks ago. He said it really doesn't matter to us anymore. If you want to take away the ground game, we can throw it all over the lot. If you want to take away our passing game, we'll run it down your throat. And he's proven that. The last 4 weeks, the scores that Clemson is running up with their offense are insane, and they're on the level of Alabama right now as far as scoring margin is concerned. I mean, for Clemson this year, 430 points scored, 120 allowed. That's plus 310. That's Alabama-like. This is going to be a difficult matchup for BC to win, not necessarily cover considering the conditions, but I just, when the Clemson defense has been asked to play, it's played, and I feel like they get up for these big style games. Clemson is no stranger to big games. This is being touted as a big game. You obviously just mentioned it as a big game. Clemson knows that. I can see the reason why this line has gone up, Drew, because I feel like there probably is that significant of a gap between these two teams. BC's got the talented running back. But expect Clemson to throw 8 in the box and see what Boston College can do through the air. I just find it hard, without the help of turnovers, I find it hard for BC to win. I don't want to lay this type of price, though, so it's probably a game I'd stay away from. Total-wise, I couldn't disagree with you. If Clemson is stopped somewhat in the running game, maybe this does stay under 58.5.
Right, let's head to the SEC West. We got Ole Miss at Texas A&M, 67.5, with the Aggies laying 11.5 or 12 at home.
Yeah, Ole Miss loves these wide open shootout style games. I don't know. Let's say that Jimbo Fisher is probably, and his defense is probably somewhere between the lousy defense that they saw last week of South Carolina and the ultra elite defenses which Mississippi couldn't penetrate so far this year out of the West. They couldn't do anything against Bama. They couldn't do anything against LSU. They couldn't do anything against Auburn. But if you give them a defense that's not elite, they're going to make their plays. So for Texas A&M, they'll have to score. The total here has gone from 62 to 67, 5-point spike. I can thoroughly understand it because I think Kellen Mond and company may have their best offensive day on the season. And Mississippi's in such dire straits that they've converted running backs to defensive back to try and fill some holes on the defensive side of the football. So Texas A&M being as balanced as they are, being able to run and throw, causes a lot of trouble for Ole Miss. When I look at Mississippi games now, Drew, without dragging out the analysis any longer, it's really pretty simple to me. I just look at the total, figure out if I think Ole Miss can score their share, and if they can, I go ahead and play it over. This game probably sits right at the tipping point right now. I think that 38-31 is probably a good area to start your handicap here. That's 69. If you like over, you've still got a little bit of wiggle room. But I would expect that this game goes up even further. Mississippi games generally don't go down where totals are concerned. So I would probably still look towards over 67 in that game.
Yeah, I already bought up about 5 points now. This is another game bought up on the side standpoint. Kentucky opened 3.5 on the road against Tennessee. Now we're seeing 6s pretty much across the board. 42.5 the total in Knoxville, Robbie.
I think it makes some sense. Kentucky went through a real difficult spurt the last 2 weeks with Missouri, and their high-flying offense played very well with their defense and escaped with a 15-14 lead by 15-14 win by some miracle. Came back last week and just were outmatched by Georgia, but they're not outmatched here by Tennessee, and they're certainly not outmatched physically by Tennessee. It was surprising to me, Drew. I'll give you a number here that it kind of caught me off guard when I was going through this game last night. Tennessee's only been outscored on the year by 21 points, put up 219, given up 240. you look back and you can find a couple of instances where they really smoked the opposition, which is where all of that number lies. It's a pretty skewed number because they beat East Tennessee and Texas El Paso by a combined 83-3. So there's plus 80 right there, making up for some of the deficits that they've had in these games. When they've faced physical football teams, it's been troublesome. I think back in week 4, and even still, I think you would probably still consider Florida a physical football team, but they lose by 26. They play Georgia, a physical football team. They lose by 26. Somehow they beat Auburn, and I think that's a testament to how bad the offense of Auburn is, more than a testament to Tennessee. But they got run off the field by Alabama, and they haven't really played a physical defense since. This is going to be very tough for them. I think Kentucky can shut them down. I agree with the line movement here. If it were me, I'd be on Kentucky. The only problem with the Kentucky Wildcats right now, Drew, and I think they proved last week, it was proven to all of us, they're not an elite team. For those who were touting Kentucky, the SEC East goes through Lexington, and you got to stop that nonsense a little bit because I don't think any of us believed it. But they were proven to be there. They're better, but they're not at that level of Georgia yet. That being said, they can probably push Tennessee around on both sides of the football here. And I was trying to get to the fact that the one thing that bothers me about them is I don't think quarterback Terry Wilson and all his abilities, dual threat, has gotten much better as the season's gone on. I think he's the same quarterback in week 10 here as he was in week 1. Despite that, Kentucky's just one of those teams in games like this where they can turn around and hand off. They can beat you. They can cover small numbers. This is a small number. Tennessee's going to have a hard time moving the football, so I agree with the line move here.
Yeah, that's good analysis. I mean, I would say his best game, or one of his best games, was that week 2 or week 3 game against Florida when they knocked off the Gators in the Swamp. So I would agree with you on that. He's had a tough time improving. Robbie, moving down the card here, I believe 2 independents, BYU at UMass, 14. The Cougars laying on the road, 60 the total.
Yeah, I just, UMass is fun to watch. Just like last week when they play Liberty, a team that can't stop anybody, and UMass can get out and throw the football all over the lot. They do that to bad defenses. And Ross Comas, the backup quarterback, who had a couple of games prior to that, Drew, after Andrew Ford went down with a season-ending injury, there were a couple of games where UMass put up yards, but no points. Last week, they bounced back and put up their share of points. But when faced with a defense like this, I find it difficult for them to see them moving the football on BYU. And I'll say one other thing about BYU. Their freshman quarterback, Zach Wilson, who, for anybody who watched the game last week against Boise State, it almost got sickening to the point of hearing Andre Ware just prop this kid up, but with good reason. They found themselves a quarterback here, and if they can develop this offense, it's gotten better. Obviously, his first start about 3 weeks ago when they went to somewhat of an up-tempo offense, it got better, had a sag, and then came back a little bit last week against a tough Boise State defense. They can put up some real numbers here in this game against Massachusetts, which is another one of those teams that we've talked about throughout the last 4 weeks that's just played a long, drawn-out season. Go all the way back to August 25th, week 0, when they played Duquesne, and they're now playing for the 11th time in 12 weeks. I think against a physical team like this is when that stuff really starts to show up. I don't expect UMass to put up much resistance on the defensive side, and I wouldn't expect them to be able to do the type of damage that they're capable of against weak defenses. Comas is going to be running for his life away from this Brigham Young front seven. So I think this is a real good spot for BYU, which has not in any way, shape, or form quit on this season. They're trying to get better each and every week. I think head coach Sataki is one of those guys who won't allow them to give up. So I would be on BYU here.
Robbie, we'll talk about Liberty and Virginia. You mentioned Liberty is one of the teams that was faster than Wake Forest, so they're going to be running up-tempo here in Charlottesville, going against Virginia, who had a tough matchup this past weekend, and it looks like they're having to lay 23.5, 60.5 the total, Robbie.
It would be hard to lay that type of price here, Drew, for a couple of reasons. One, I think the Pittsburgh loss is deflating for Virginia, a team that hasn't had a lot of success, hasn't had a lot of hype for a long, long time. The whole Mike London tenure, the first couple years of Bronco Mendenhall's stay here in Charlottesville, they haven't been good. Now all of a sudden, heading into last week's game, they were good. They were talked about. People were opening their eyes to Virginia, and they lay an egg. 23-13 against Pittsburgh, a team they were favored to beat, a team that's a Coastal Division rival, a team that really could have, a game that really could have put Virginia in the absolute driver's seat heading toward the ACC championship. How did they handle that failure? Well, Bronco Mendenhall is a seasoned veteran head coach, so I'd put my faith in him to have his team back and ready to play here. But there's no guarantee that the kids will respond. I don't know. I tried to read as much as I could to see if you can get a feel for the what's going on between the ears of the Virginia players, but that's such a hard thing to project. I think for Bryce Perkins and the offense, once they get on the field and find out how easy it is to move the football against Liberty, let's face it, it's the same in any sport. When you find a team where you can build stats, that's a fun time. I think Virginia will figure that out in their first drive. How much does a really good defense allow Liberty to do on the offensive side? This could be very comparable to what we just talked about with BYU and UMass. It could almost line up and be the same type of game. The only difference here I find in this one, like I say, is the situational aspect of how Virginia bounces back. But I do think that, you take the ball on your first possession and you go down the field with Bryce Perkins, maybe 5 plays, touchdown, and the game gets to be a lot of fun, and you forget what happened against Pitt the week before. So the game doesn't mean anything. It's a game against Liberty and Independent. It doesn't matter in the ACC standings. It's a tough game to handicap. I think if nothing else, maybe you can catch an over with this one, because I think it'll be that easy for Virginia to move the football, and Liberty's always got that shot to score a couple of touchdowns with that passing game.
Robbie, let's talk about two of the better teams in the Sun Belt going to game numbers 131, 132. Troy at Georgia Southern. This one in Statesboro. Troy laying 1 across the board. Looks like 44.5 or 45 the total.
Opposite results last week, right? I mean, for Troy, a real nice win. 26-16 over UL Lafayette. That's a nice win. Lafayette's had great success offensively this season, and especially in their running game. And we know that Troy, ever since they lost Caleb Barker, the starting quarterback, Sawyer Smith has stepped in, but the results haven't been positively consistent. So last week's 26-16 win to me was a real big one for Troy. On the other hand, the mess that Georgia Southern got involved in last week, it's crazy with Georgia Southern, because the week before they beat Appalachian State by 20 points, something nobody saw coming, 34-14 win. And the following week, you figure, okay, Georgia Southern's on their way. You play UL Monroe, a team that had been stumbling through the season, probably below expectations for sure. And they lose 44-25. Caleb Evans has a monster game. 13 completions, Drew, for 337 yards. That's almost 26 yards. In fact, it is 26 yards a pop throwing the football against the Georgia Southern defense. Kind of amazed me. I don't know if they lived on cloud 9 after the win against Appalachian State. I think that game is more of a mirage than reality. You step into this one here, you're going to get 2 real good defenses. Troy's pretty good against the run, and for Georgia Southern and Shai Wertz, the quarterback of Georgia Southern, they're going to have to be able to make a couple of throws here, because I don't think that they're going to be able to just flat out run the football against Troy. Now, that being said, they did it against Appalachian State. 50 carries, 277 yards. So, it's probably just my opinion that they can't run it successfully all day long against Troy. But you could certainly counter me with an argument that says, but Rob, they did it against Appalachian State. It's the truth. We'll see which way it goes here. I think you get a pretty low scoring game. The two defenses are the best units on the field, and we'll see how Sawyer Smith does against a Georgia Southern defense that has to be a little bit ticked off after last week's performance. But I'll say this, if that 13 completion, 337-yard performance is indicative of the way Georgia Southern's pass defense is going, then Sawyer Smith and Troy are going to make some big plays here. I just don't see it happening, though.
Yeah, Robbie, that Georgia, you touched on it, that ULM Georgia Southern game, that was a wild one. That one shocked me. I can't believe ULM put up that many points. I mean, that Georgia Southern defensive front, for Sun Belt standards, really gets after the quarterback. So I couldn't believe that they were able to do that offensively. Did you see the game or just kind of breaking down the box score?
Yeah, no, I'm just kind of breaking down the box score because I didn't have an interest in it. Went to check out a couple of highlights, but it does surprise me. Caleb Evans, as well as me, the quarterback for UL Monroe,
he's good.
Is a good quarterback, right? Yeah. And the results just haven't been there this year, and they showed up not in the form of number of completions or pass completion percentage last week, but certainly the downfield game showed up for ULM last week. I don't know if it took Georgia Southern by surprise or what, or if that was the game plan going in. Listen, let's attack these guys vertically. But it worked, and we'll see if Troy doesn't pick up something off tape and do the same thing.
Robbie, a couple more games here. And guys, remember the coupon code VENO40 at checkout for 40% off any of Rob Veno's all-access packages. Remember, right now, this time of year, we got college football, NFL, NBA, college basketball, a lot going on. So college basketball is also a great sport to be a sports bettor as well. So much for the odds makers to do. So look out for that at sportsmemo.com. And Veno40 is the coupon code for 40% off any all access with Robbie Veno. Heading out to the Big 12, Rob. Baylor at Iowa State. Looks like Baylor catching 14.5, 51 the total in Ames.
I like the way Baylor's progressed under Matt Rule, no doubt about it. Last week they come from behind and get that win against Oklahoma State. Charlie Brewer exits the game. McClendon comes in, wins the game. But it's hard against Iowa State right now the way they're playing, Drew. If I just took the last two games as a total picture of the Baylor Bears, they only get 287 total yards against West Virginia and then get 402 against Oklahoma State. I think Baylor's well equipped with their wide receiving core, with that Swiss knife type threat in Jalen Hurd, the ex-Tennessee running back, with Brewer at quarterback, with McClendon at quarterback. I think they're very capable of playing 4 consistent quarters against defenses that aren't up to par, which Oklahoma State's hasn't been for the better part of this season. Take the first couple of games away. Since that Boise State game, they've been a disaster defensively. But West Virginia is a pretty good defensive team by Big 12 standards. Certainly the secondary's been pretty good, and Baylor had trouble. Iowa State might be the cream of the crop defensively in the Big 12. So this is a difficult task for Baylor. Iowa State puts a ton of pressure on the opposing backfield with their front seven. This is a tough game for Baylor. The question for me is, how many times in a row can Iowa State keep playing these types of games? And right now, I don't know that there's an end in sight, to tell you the truth. This is one of those where you say, I don't want to step in front of that train, because Iowa State right now is that train. Last week against Kansas, not only did they win 27-3, not only did they hold them to 332 yards, but they got Kansas coach fired. David Beatty gone at the end of the season. He'll finish it out. But that was enough. KU didn't need to see any more. Last week, they complete 71% of their passes, Iowa State. They can move it with Montgomery on the road. They can move it with Purdy through the air. There's just too much going on that's good for Iowa State right now to step in their way. As much as I like what Baylor's done progress-wise, you won't catch me on them in this game. And Iowa State, totals-wise, they're a difficult handicap. They're very, very capable of scoring and getting games over when involved against a pretty good offense. And then we saw last week how they can keep games under. Only 30 points scored in that contest because their defense can overwhelm an offense. This one sits somewhere in between. I'd probably play Iowa State and let the total go.
Robbie, heading to an AAC battle. Navy at Central Florida. We got UCF laying 25.5 at home, 63.5 the total. I got an opinion on this one, but I want to hear what you got to say first.
You love that UCF team. Hey, listen, last week they got torched defensively for sure. Temple showed a lot of people, I think, who didn't know or believe that Temple could move the ball as in as big a chunks as they did and as quickly as they did, because Temple was scoring at a rapid rate in the first half. So Central Florida ran into a team that was as physical as them, that had capabilities to go downfield, and the defense got lit up. The question with Navy is always, can you stop the triple option? And by Navy standards, they've been way down this year, Drew. Again, last week, another disappointing effort out of the Navy midshipmen. I know when you stare at their overall numbers and you see that they're running for 287 a game, that looks pretty good. But Cincinnati shuts them out 42-zip last week. I think in this contest, they'll have some ability to run the football, but it doesn't matter. You know, the old saying for the armed forces teams, the military teams, run the option, grind some clock, and keep the other offense off the field. Mackenzie Milton will get on the field against Navy, and they'll score in less than a minute 20. So it doesn't matter. They could lose time of possession by 15 minutes in this game and still win by 4 touchdowns. That stuff doesn't matter. It doesn't come into play here. It really boils down to, on their possessions, how many times will Navy score against UCF? I'd expect a little bit of a bounce-back effort out of the UCF defense. I don't know that they're really strong at stopping option-style football, but when it's all you have to worry about, it really becomes, so much about assignments and not as difficult. And if Navy has to chase here, Drew, I saw this once before earlier in the season. I'll use this comparison to end the analysis. Navy got behind Hawaii 21-0 way back in September, and that rushing offense just could never get back in the game. They started to score and score and score, but they ended up losing by 18 points because you just can't catch up enough. And with all the speed on the field for Hawaii that day, it showed up. Hawaii threw for 436 yards against them, and that speed for Central Florida is even more than what Hawaii brings to the table. And the quarterback position, Cole McDonald's nice, dual threat. Mackenzie Milton is the ultimate college football dual threat. I just don't see Navy staying close. 25.5 is a lot for me to get involved with, but in a UCF game like this, the over might not be too much for me to get involved with.
Yeah, no, good breakdown, Robbie. I pretty much agree with everything you said, and also add in the fact, that Temple UCF game was on a Thursday night, so they get 2 extra days to prepare for that option attack. I think that will help the UCF defense as well, and I do think Navy will be able to put it in the end zone. But like you said, I mean, UCF might score every single possession. They'll likely have a turnover or something, but I don't see Navy stopping UCF very much at all. Do you?
No, honestly, after seeing, and again, the most comparable game I can use on Navy's schedule would be Hawaii. And Hawaii almost put up 60. They got 59 that day. I watched that game from first quarter to fourth, so I got to see Cole McDonald and that wide receiving crew, John Ursua and guys, it just constantly running free. And Hawaii doesn't have much of a ground game to go with that passing attack, Drew. Central Florida can run the football. You're worried about Milton running the football. You're worried about the basic running game and the pass game. And they just move at such a rapid pace. It's difficult for a Navy here. I think 63 just looks a little bit low to me because in my mind, Central Florida could find 52, without blinking an eyelash here in this game.
Yeah, I can see that as well. We got a Big 12 matchup here, TCU at West Virginia. At the beginning of the year, you wouldn't have seen West Virginia laying 11.5, but it's going to happen on Saturday. 56 the total.
It's a strange line move to me, Drew. I don't know who would want to be backing TCU at this point in time. The last couple of weeks just show you how far they have fallen from an offensive standpoint. When you can't score in the Big 12, not only can't you win, but you can't cover either. Gary Patterson's defense continues to play pretty well. Last week, only give up 13 points, win a 14-13 game. But when you play 2 one-point games in a row against Kansas and Kansas State and come out of it 1-1, you got trouble. I mean, you go to 1 week ahead of that and see the TCU game against Oklahoma, 52-27 Oklahoma, and that's going to be the problem. Because Will Grier and company can score the way Oklahoma can score, And right now, TCU, Sean Robinson wasn't the answer at quarterback, but not having Sean Robinson at quarterback anymore doesn't help them. It makes it even worse for TCU, a team that only gained 275 total yards last week at home. The line move to me here is head scratching. I think West Virginia certainly can find their way to the mid-30s, and I don't even know if TCU could score 20 against a team like this. So, you come off the Texas game last week where West Virginia had the 2-point conversion at the end, a huge victory. Maybe what's the money is seeing right now is a potential letdown by West Virginia, but I don't know. When you have to find your way to one of the top 2 spots in the Big 12 in order to make that Big 12 championship game, I don't know that there's a letdown at this time of year. I think West Virginia is too good for that. And I feel bad for Gary Patterson and TCU because the expectations to start the year were huge. They started off the year real well. Injuries, permanent suspensions, when you have to throw Kevontae Turpin off the team, your best offensive weapon, it just makes for a difficult finish to the season. I don't think there's any reason. He can try, and he's a good head coach, but motivation at this point in time when you're TCU with the expectations you had coming in and faced with the position you're in now, which is little to nothing, I don't know. I just don't see TCU hanging with West Virginia in that game.
Robbie, we've got 139-140. Miami at Georgia Tech, 55.5 the total, with Tech laying 3.5 and Bobby Dodd on Saturday.
And boy, the way they're running the football, Drew, is crazy right now. Paul Johnson's offense is just running roughshod over any opponent put in front of them. 465 yards 2 weeks ago, 461 yards last week. Miami's defense is better than both Virginia Tech's and North Carolina's, but I don't know. Georgia Tech ran for 229 against a real good Duke defense, so Miami's got their hands full here with this particular offense of Georgia Tech and the way Mark Richt's team is going. It's interesting. All of a sudden, Mark Richt is on a hot seat in his second year at Miami, and it's all due to the inconsistent quarterback play, whether it be Rozier, whether it be Perry. Neither one of those guys has been the answer for Miami. Offense has been bad. If they have to throw it, they can't throw it. If you can shut their ground game down. Georgia Tech is not good at shutting down anything. So from that perspective, maybe Miami can move the football a little bit better this week. You're staring at a total of 55.5 here. In my mind right now, I'd have to see Miami stop the Georgia Tech ground game, especially with Georgia Tech at home, to believe it. But I don't think that's going to happen. And I think Georgia Tech, if they find their way to 35 points here, Drew, which, with limited possessions with the limited possessions that they get because of the style they play, they're scoring so quickly. You watch them play and it's 7, 14, 21, 28. I know this defense is a little bit better, but I may get involved in that total. 55.5 to me just seems to be a little bit too low. Georgia Tech is not good on defense. You can throw it against them. Miami definitely has the potential to, while they're not a good completion percentage team, they have the ability to get a couple of deep strikes. May happen here against Georgia Tech.
Robbie, 2 games left, and guys, remember the coupon code Veno40, 40% at checkout off of any All Access with Robbie Veno. We got Kansas at Kansas State, 45.5 the total, Robbie, 10.5 or 11, Kansas State laying at home.
There'd be a lot of guesswork to get involved in this game seriously, Drew, because you have to, is it going to be let's win out for the Gipper type of thing with David Beatty, or is it, let's just, let them go and start new? I don't know how the Kansas kids are going to react to this head coach in these final couple of games, so that makes it difficult. My guess, and strictly a guess, would be that KU is so young and the talent level, although it doesn't show up in the record, the talent level has increased. They've done a pretty good job recruiting considering they're Kansas. But I don't know how it's going to go for them. I know on the other side, you just watched last week, and KSU plays their guts out for Bill Snyder. They're just not very good. So you got 2 teams here, a ton of question marks. Games being played in Manhattan. If I had to, I think I'd probably take 10.5 with Kansas. I think that's just too big of a price for KSU to lay at this point in time. You may even look toward the total here, 45.5 in a college football game. Nowadays, we say it all the time. It just seems so low. But, the way Kansas State is playing games right now, maybe it's not. I couldn't sit here on the podcast and recommend side or total to anybody listening, so I won't. But just guesswork. I think maybe Kansas will play hard for their coach on his way out.
The old win one for the Gipper, Robbie.
Yeah, it's crazy, right?
All right, last game up here, Robbie. We got 143, 144. Akron at EMU, Eastern Michigan. Little Maction to end it. 44 the total with 12.5 seems to be about the prevailing number. Eastern Michigan laying that at home.
Boy, I tried this scenario last week, Drew. I tried laying 13 with EMU against Central last week, and it just didn't work out. 17-7, win by 10, get the win, don't get the cover. And Akron's a better team than Central Michigan. Central Michigan's just a disaster this year. Akron last week, Cato Nelson throws for 299 against Northern Illinois. It's his highest passing yardage total of the season, and it came in the midst of driving rain, and it came against the best defense they'd played all season long inside the MAC. Still, he had a real successful game. They're capable. I really like the talent on Eastern Michigan. They've been involved in all those close games, right? They get involved in those 3-point games all the time. So perhaps it was dumb of me to go ahead and lay 13 against Central Michigan. I just thought the talent gap was that much between those two. I don't think it's that much here, yet we're staring at basically the same line. I see it's been driven down to 12.5, 12 at Chris, I guess I'm looking at right now. Can't recommend Eastern Michigan to cover that number. Can't really recommend the Akron side either. It's possible, though, to me, Drew, after what I saw last week, that Akron's defense could be wearing down a little bit, and maybe an over could be in play here. 43.5, again, 2 points lower than the game we just talked about, Kansas State. And off of Nelson's 299-yard performance against Northern Illinois, Eastern Michigan's a good defense by MAC standards. Northern Illinois is the best defense inside the MAC. So possibly over here could get my attention. 43.5. You get a 24-20 game. You win. This one looks like it could have that written all over it.
All right, Robbie, great stuff. Breaking down a bunch of games here. We'll be back tomorrow with Teddy Covers picking us up first, and Robbie Veno will also be part of it on finishing off the college football every game on the board podcast. Guys, remember on sportsmemo.com, if you're liking Robbie Veno, get his service. Veno40 at checkout is the coupon code for 40% off any of the all-access selections on sportsmemo.com. Best of luck with your bets tonight, and we will be back tomorrow finishing off the college football every game on the board podcast.